You've written about the economic impact and how it's becoming severe now with supercharging rents. Also how 10% of Australia's population is in an economically highly disadvantaged position after this influx of 1.2 million immigrants since 2022. Can you just explain that for us?
Yeah, sure. Look, that was my column last Friday, and I started it by referring back to Queensland, where in the late 19th century we imported, as largely more or less slave labour, or at least indentured servants, we imported islanders who worked on the farms, the sugar plantations, and at one point they were about 10% of the state's population. Now in 901 we sent them all home, largely all of them, and then I realised now, fast forward 120 years, we've still got 10% of the Australian population this time, the whole country, more than 2 million people who are in similar, obviously not as bad, but similar situation. They don't have the same rights as Australian workers. They can be certainly taken advantage of by employers who know that they can dob them into authorities if they're working too many hours, or if they can force them to accept cash work. And I'm sure that goes on a great deal. And I pointed out that this 10%. Just like back in Queensland all those years ago, this actually benefits the wealthy. The wealthy Queensland farmers did not want this labour to be sent home. And just like now, I think the inner city wealthy voters want their cheap Uber rides, they want their cheap restaurants, they want their cheap cleaners and nannies and so forth. The same sort of economic arguments are at play again. And for lower income native-born Australians, the competition for low-skilled jobs is huge. Of course, it's supercharging rents, cost of housing is through the roof. So I think the housing issue and the immigration issue really can't be separated. And so far I'd have to say, I think Angus is a bit weak, I'd probably say on that. He's just talking about supply. Everyone likes talking about supply. It's the hand-wavy, easy answer. But Labor's already trying to get supply up and it can't. The reality is you just can't build houses very quickly. It's just hard to do. You need the workers. They've got to be they have to be zoned correctly. So I think just talking about supply is not going to do it. I think you need to cut the level of immigrants.
No, absolutely. Look, Jim Chalmers, he's rejected Angus Taylor's offer to work on a bipartisan approach to rein in government spending. Jim Chalmers has rejected Angus Taylor's offer to work on a bipartisan approach to rein in government spending. Taylor wrote to the Prime Minister arguing that the budget repair task was just too big for politics as usual, but Jim Chalmers immediately dismissed the proposal, labelling it as a political stunt. It might have been, but the federal spending has been forecast to exceed $1 trillion in the near future, Adam.
Yeah, look, it's extraordinary. I mean, I spent a few years in Washington and I came back and federal spending had gone from something like $500 billion a year to $750 billion. I mean, that is just eye-popping, and the growth rates are still extraordinary. I mean, the last few years, more or less, have been the fastest growth outside COVID since the Whitlam government in the 70s, and it's a serious problem. It's fueling inflation, as you know, 3.8% inflation. It's rising. There's budget deficits as far as the eye can see, even though tax revenues are rising extremely quickly every year. So spending is certainly out of control. And just back to One Nation briefly, they do actually have policies on their website, as I understand it, that would significantly cut spending, such as scrapping all of the associated climate change subsidies and departments, which, at least on the IPA's calculation, is more than $10 billion a year now. So that's a lot of money. There's various agencies that can be scrapped, but the Coalition hasn't actually said yet how it would cut spending. And it's difficult as soon as you talk about, say, the NDIS, which is out of control, as you know, soon to cost more than the military, you get accused of treating the disabled poorly. So it's very hard politics, but it has to be faced up to.